Hi, everybody. My name is Aaron Myers, and I'm the General Manager for Transcend Employee Engagement. I really appreciate you taking the time to check this out today. So this educational presentation was created to offer solutions for rebuilding employee confidence, trust, and for providing resources to leaders that can assist any organization moving forward. In a recent environment where we lack so much control over so many factors, it is important to put maximum efforts into human capital. And as we recover from the after effects of COVID-19, it's worth exploring how these solutions can be realized with employee engagement. So why is this important? Why did I create this presentation, and why should you be listening to me? First, I believe that we should offer solutions to every problem that we have. Holistic engagement resources in the workplace is something that I genuinely believe in because I've lived it. So here's the topics that we're going to be talking about today. Communication in our generations. I would estimate that about 95% of my problems were caused by a communication error. And it goes well beyond talking and listening. I mean, it involves the art of mastering the finding balance between empathy, understanding, and accountability, to get results. And in this incredibly complex working environment with a multitude of cultural identities and ever-changing technologies, our success is bound to the comprehension of our environment's belief and value systems. We're going to be talking about recovering from COVID's devastation. Our people really are our greatest resource. And as we recover from the after effects of everything that happened in 2020, they're going to need us more than ever. So we have to rebuild trust, confidence, and faith within our ranks. We're going to go into great detail about the battle for talent, something that I believe is being undervalued right now. And with the baby boomer generation ready to exit, this is something that's going to be of great importance. And finally, we're going to talk about providing our leaders with the resources that are needed. I argue that no one can find workplace nirvana unless they have outstanding leadership in front of them. And our leaders need to have the resources to be able to develop the tangible and abstract duties that their job entails. So leadership and communication. I'm going to give you a little background about myself. For 22 years, I was a senior non-commissioned officer in the armed forces. And I'm going to reference a lot of my personal experiences to assist, because I believe you should contextualize any material you're putting out to show you the why behind everything. And everyone knows about the military's communication system, the bottom line up front, one-way directive communicating, which was very effective for a very long period of time and universally accepted because nobody challenged it. But as my career progressed and this Generation Y and Generation Z started coming in, I started seeing a swinging of the pendulum. I started hearing leaders come at me saying, this isn't my fault. These generations just don't understand work ethic, pride, you name it, right? And they gave me all sorts of reasons as to why they couldn't get their jobs done. So whenever I was in doubt, I always would reference the definition of leadership. And if you can see right there on the screen, leadership is the process of influencing others, right? By providing purpose, direction, and motivation. Nowhere in there does it say that people will blindly follow your every lead and follow you to the ends of the earth without questioning. That's just not the reality of it. So one thing that, as we try to fix this and get to understand our people better, we failed to recognize that the world was drastically changing around us. We didn't understand our operating environment, nor were we able to provide resources to our leaders to get the job done. So today I'm going to talk a little bit more about how we did that to the best of our abilities. Now, everyone's seen something about a generation in the workplace, what their traits are, what their skills are. I really want to focus on the millennials just because they're the ones right now that have the power. They wield about $1.4 trillion of spending in our economy, and they make up the majority of the workplace. So during the Great Recession, I had a real hard time understanding what was going on in this country because I was deployed to Iraq. And when I came back, I was promoted to a leadership position in southern Minnesota. So as I was building my team up, I offered a job to a 25-year-old soldier who was very, very capable. And I thought for sure he would say yes, but he told me, I need to talk it over with my family first. And that really surprised me. I didn't understand what that meant. So luckily for me, I started asking questions as to why. And what I found out was this young man and his family lost everything in the Great Recession. They were living together for a week. They lived in a car. And he made a vow that they would come together and work this through until they had the financial means to move away from it. So he had an incredible bond with his family. This is someone that was incredibly selfless. I mean, he had the best values that any soldier I've ever seen, and more capable than most. But if I would have followed my instincts and I would have just told this guy, no, you know what, you living with your parents sounds like it feels like a weakness to me. I would have missed out on an opportunity of having a great soldier on my team. So I'm really glad I did. And for my generation and a lot of our generations, anyone's from the X generation, we were the show us where it is and we'll figure out a way to get it done. I mean, I remember walking out of my house at 18 years of age and going to college, without even thinking twice about it. And I love my family, no doubt about it, but I had a hard time, and I think a lot of people have a hard time understanding the generational traits and cultures that these new that Y and Z bring to us. So take a look at Generation Z coming up. They have 50% of their population, of the 2 billion that are on the earth, are diverse in nature. So if we don't understand Generation Y, the one that's in the workplace now, we're going to have a really hard time understanding Generation Z and finding ways to lead them to better results. So engage your employees, dig deep to discover what they value, what motivates them. This can simply be done by asking the question why. And take a look at that quote from Socrates there. Don't dismay if you feel like you're alone in this, because you're not. He himself even believed that this generation was having a very, very difficult time with understanding where he was coming from. So this is something that's been going around for thousands of years. All right. We have to understand it. We have to recognize it, and we have to find a way to move forward with it. So let's talk about COVID's effects in the workplace. I mean, dramatic, right? People suffer from burnout. They have trust issues, confidence issues, need to be rebuilt. People have been laid off. People have had their workloads doubled in some cases. I always reference our heroic nurses and medical staff and doctors. There was a study done that showed that they had significant physical limitations, newfound or enhanced headaches, stomach issues, polar extremes of mood adjustment, attitudes towards patients, employees, interpersonal shifts, such as withdrawing from groups. I mean, think about that. That's one working group. Now, what would happen if you suffer from any of those symptoms? I mean, that's something that would dramatically affect the way that you live your life and affect your performance in the workplace. So here's my question to you. Like, if you look at this from a small team perspective, how many of you have been provided resources to combat this? How many of you out there that are leaders have been giving resources or given training to say, hey, this is how we're going to combat this, right? Take a look again at my organization, my former organization, the military. We had 11,000 people in Minnesota for a total force strength. Many of them were deployed to this place called National Training Center. Many of them were deployed to the Middle East. Within this last year, they activated the entire state during the riots in the Twin Cities. And along with all of our other duties, we were doing COVID testing. So taking that in consideration and taking a look at what they had the responsibilities they had on them, that was an incredible endeavor to bring calm, reliable communications to these people. So XYZ generations, think about how it affected each group. At some point, most of our population is going to receive a vaccine, and we're going to attempt to normalize. So this journal called Fast Company, they put out an exceptional article about what the post-COVID environment is going to look like. And the likelihood of returning to normal is just not the case. All right. It's not realistic. There's still going to be disruptive challenges. There's going to be potentially more difficult circumstances to manage from a leadership's point of view. And the political landscape is going to continue to remain unstable. It really is. But amidst this negativity, there really are great opportunities to advance, and to adapt, as long as people are willing to capitalize on these opportunities and they can provide solutions. So the rest of this presentation, what I want to do is I want to show you tactics, techniques, and insights for your frontline employees, your leaders, your managers, and to help you with your organizational brand. All right, so first of all, how are we going to solve this baby boomer population problem? I implore you, please take a look into this, because this is something that is just going to change the landscape completely. 10,000 baby boomers are eligible to retire every day. And I just recently received my MBA. During my MBA, I must have looked over hundreds of 10Ks. as I was working through the economics, the business research parts, everything, every part that was made up of my curriculum. I very rarely in the risk evaluations saw plans or even acknowledgement that this institutional knowledge that's going to be lost from the baby boomers is going to be a problem. So take a look at a firm that has sales as a primary factor, which, sales is the ante for everything that we do. Now, research shows that if you have an experienced salesperson that loses an account and you hand it over to someone from within your organization, expect an 11% profit loss. If you hire someone from the outside, expect 22%. Those are pretty drastic numbers. And what that refers to is the customer engagement paradox. The customer engagement paradox is something where firms rely heavily on one resource, knowing that when that resource leaves, they're going to have a heck of a time rebuilding. So what I think is going to happen, and what I think is the best way to solve this, is through a succession strategy, but not just any succession strategy, an inclusive succession strategy. So what that does is that takes internal employees and it earmarks them to take over an expected departure, right? Now, if you just do this with one person, it can create perception issues. It can disengage a workplace. So inclusive strategies is where leadership development programs are available for everybody. It puts confidence in the workforce that all of their people are entitled to outstanding leadership, that all their people are entitled to dignity, respect, and equal opportunity. So this is something that needs to be planned. It needs to be calculated. You need to put your people in situations where they can grow and where they can learn in an environment where they're not going to lose anything if they make a mistake. Basic training, right? Just training, training, training. All right, so let's go to the next slide here. All right. So this one really touches base with me here because there were so many industries that were affected by sales losses. I mean, by you name it, by the COVID environment, and they lost their target market, right? So a lot of people had their target markets cut off from them. We were no different. We had lost a target market where we could not reach people face to face and had to revert to other methods. Now, I would argue that most organizations were not ready for this, ours included. And I remember one small team coming up and asking for resources, saying like, hey, we really need help with this. What are we going to do? We really don't have a developed secondary or tertiary market that we can attack. When we asked what their leadership said, their leader said, I don't know the answer, but you're going to have to find it out. All right. Put yourself in that position. My first question would be, why do we even have leadership positions if that's what I'm going to get from my managers? Imagine the frustration and the trust lost when that team, for example, saw all the other teams that had their leaders forward deployed. They were synchronizing efforts with markets, researching social media streaming methods, synchronization methods. And in order to do this in a safe manner, they were right there with their people doing servant leadership. Now, that's going to really create a rift in the organization, right? And we are all aware, though, that leadership is not a one size fits all. Right? You have to be a transformational, situational leader. And by doing that, you embrace a holistic vision of managing strengths and weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So what you're going to see on the slide here are the most common themes that I found in my research. All right. These common themes are ones that said this is something that's happening and these can directly affect in a positive direction momentum during the COVID environment. So first one we're going to talk about. And by the way, I'm going to present this at the end, my contacts at the end of the presentation. If you want to reach out to me, I can go more in depth in this and talk about talk about anything that you need to talk about, as I'm just basically summarizing this right now. So resolving consumer conflict, that addresses a serious issue in today's environment, especially in industries such as retail, where customers' frustrations have escalated to all-time levels. Remember earlier when I said millennials, 74% of them would walk away. 74% would walk away from just one bad experience, right? Now think about this. Think about in the scheme of things, where customers now have never been more upset. They've never been more upset with what's going on. They're frustrated, just as are the employees, and it's creating escalations at an all-time high. So this is something that's going to require acknowledgement and training, because your frontline workers, I assure you, are spinning their wheels. They are absolutely at ends meet having to deal with this level of frustration. So productivity propensity, this is a system to measure and assist in defining job duties and employee worth. This is very important today because the environments are ripe with layoffs. They're ripe with recognizing reorganization of some sort. So different responsibilities have shifted to different leaders. Some of them have not even referenced a standard operating procedure. They really don't know what their job now is because they've just been handed a responsibility with no context behind it. Okay. So acknowledging terms, what I call terms of reference. Terms of reference basically describe everything your primary, secondary duties within that job description. Reference that. That will give encouragement to burden employees. It's a good foundation for struggling or new employees also to demonstrate how their responsibilities can be improved with good leadership. Behavioral strategies such as situational leadership quadrants. It's not only a way to match capability and attitude with leadership styles and tactics, but it's really an effective time management device. As the more you know your people, the more you're going to be able to put your efforts into where they need to be. I've always heard the phrase, and I even said it myself, 90% of my time is spent on 10% of my problems. I'm sure you've heard that before too, maybe 80-20. But being situationally aware and knowing how to manage these employees' times, I mean, really, you should have a better percentage than that, right? Because just as much as a leader is responsible for trying to improve upon someone's weaknesses, they also need to exploit that person and those tactics' strengths. So figure that out, figure out behaviors with people, and it's going to help you to further develop strategies within the workplace. Shock leadership, that's another one too. This is situationally preparing your leaders for what if scenarios. It helps with team camaraderie, confidence, reliable bonds. It's good for all chains of command in the organization because most people aren't ready for the worst case scenario. I would ask your leaders, just as a spot check, what would they do with a sensitive issue? Think about this most sensitive issues, whether it's a safety issue, someone loses a finger on the job and you have to take over, or you have to perform first aid on that person, or you have to know where to go with it, or someone comes to you with something that's happening that's illegal. I mean, what happens? Do these people know how to react, how to move that process along the chain, handle it right at its root cause, and get it to where it needs to go? Same thing with job management replacement. God forbid people come out with COVID, right? Well, someone has to step in that position. What happens if you lose that employee to COVID? Are you prepared for this? Are you prepared to have that person take over the duties? So a lot of shock leadership where it sounds like it's the terminology itself might be a little scary to some, but believe me, it's not. All you're doing is you are training your replacements as leaders, and you are enhancing people's abilities by giving them the confidence in the worst case scenario that something would happen to them. All right, let's move on. Now let's talk about political skill and conservation of resources. I mean, these are communication skills, plain and simple. Usually the word political isn't an endeared term, especially during these times. But what it is you're trying to take people and the situation, perception and reality, and you're trying to get employee buy-in, especially in a time when things aren't working so well. So no matter the industry, no matter the circumstances of prosperity, there's always going to be perceptions in the workplace. And having the ability to talk about top to bottom driven strategies and how it affects each employee creates transparency. And I've never been in an organization where transparency is a bad thing. So finally, broadcasting organizational pride. I mean, this is the time for the teams to bond together as one. It's an engagement technique. It helps you define your organization, your role within it. It helps you utilize social media and the most modern techniques and programs that we have available to us. And it doesn't really take much creativity to broadcast it. You know, this is something that can be driven from a team level. So all 7 of these that I've described here have something in common. They require direct communication and they're best learned in a collaborative training environment. The only thing I ask of you when it comes to these traits, don't be that leader where people say, he told me I don't know the answer, but you're going to have to figure it out. All right. So the aftershock of George Floyd's death, especially where I was from, was felt throughout the country. I mean, I was on the front lines working right in Northeast Minneapolis. And when it burned for the first 2 nights, there was really no telling how much worse it was going to get. We waited for the third day. We got the call to action, and the entire 11,000 or whoever was left of the 11,000 that was in Minnesota was deployed. So they helped out. They did a great job. It was just a commendable effort on all levels, but I don't think that our organization would have been able to handle that 10 to 20 years ago. I really don't. And I'm going to give an example that validates this. So this was a story told by a very senior leader on my Iraq deployment. And before we deployed, we had to do what's called an MRX, which is a mission rehearsal exercise. This basically tells us whether we can go deploy or not. And the senior leadership team that was evaluating us met our leadership team, and they were dismayed at what they saw. They saw 3 generals and 10 full bird colonels and other leaders that all fit the same profile. They were white males. And when you take a look at this, because this team was from the active army, the evaluating team, I mean, they were as diverse gets. And they called them out for it. They did. They called them out and said, is this really what we see here? Does this reflect your organization? So it had a very profound effect on my commander, the division commander, when he came home, and he told us this. So when he came home, and we all came home, he was promoted to become the state's adjutant general, which is the highest position in Minnesota for a soldier. And he immediately put on his priorities, we are going to diversify our force. He held his recruiting teams accountable for this too. And where the percentages years ago may have been 5 to 10, the last 5 years, our recruiting forces had 30% diverse enlistments each year. So we did a really good job of starting to mirror our communities. And I put on here a clip, and I'll send the link on this forum too. But this is a very dear friend of mine. His name's AC Matthews. And if you take a look at this link, if you click on the power of diversity, you're going to see someone, Master Sergeant AC Matthews, intervene with the protesters during the riots. And remembering that days earlier, the cities were on fire. So this situation could have gone out of control. AC gained the respect of this group when he delivered a very relatable message and bonded the security forces with the community. 20 years ago, when the population was 5 to 10% diverse, that's where I say, I don't think we would have been as successful. I really don't. And I think if our adjutant general had not put a emphasis on this, our organization would have been worse off for it. So I'm telling you right now, and I've seen not just AC's example, but I've seen hundreds of examples of this. Your forces get stronger when they are diverse in nature. And I know there aren't many situations like the ones where you're in your professions, you're not going to have to go out and do riot control. But there's always a relatability factor between your customers, your employees, your leaders, and just your brand overall. Diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility, they are powerful tools for your organization. All right, and we're going to talk about one of the surest ways to evaluate effective communications. I mean, you just look at your retention rates. The World Economic Forum is starting to invest in stakeholder capitalism. So on 10K reports in the future, you're going to be seeing just as much stakeholder capitalization as shareholder capitalization, and that involves people, prosperity, planet, and principles of governance. So 10 out of 10 times a leader is going to tell you, I would rather retain a good employee than have to pay all that money and all that time and all that effort to hire a new one. So why don't our spending habits and why don't our budgets reflect more efforts to retain our employees? So I understand that most organizations are going to pay the light bill. They're going to put the efforts into what pays the light bill. And it just has to be looked at. Like, what are you making on your revenue stream against what are you losing in order to have to retain an employee? It's difficult. Now, measuring these 4 pillars is going to put that more into perspective. So a story of mine that explains how we could do this and how we can look at this differently. When I was leading a training company in southern Minnesota, I took new people that joined the military, and my job was to get them to go to their training. So in between when they enlisted and when they shipped off to their training, They had to be physically, mentally, morally, and administratively ready to go. I was evaluated on that. And there was 1 year where I had 160 out of 170 ship. That's a 94% success rate. Pretty good, right? So when our standard is 84%, I got a very good mark on my evaluation. But I think if you're going to look at this as to how you can change that or how you can look at it differently, look at it this way. It can cost the government up to $70,000 per person who does not ship to their training posts from when they enlist to when they go to their training post. So if I didn't ship 10 people that year, that's $700,000 of taxpayers' money that I lost them. Now, can you imagine if that was on my evaluation report? Or how about the person, the company commanding trainer that shipped out 120 of 150 for 80%? That person lost the taxpayers $2.1 million potentially. So here's the thing, though, is during the evaluation reports, it didn't say anywhere in there that we lost this much money. And where we expect retention to be a natural thing, there's a given percentage, which is why we're allowed 84%, because there's just some things that we can't control. But the things that we can control, we weren't held accountable to it. I remember that same year, that person that had the 80% was evaluated the same way as I did with my 94%. It didn't matter. So my boss, Dr. Bob Randall, he says it best. He says, if it is measured, it will be accomplished, period. So the question is, how are you going to measure this? How are you going to measure this? And how are you going to hold leaders accountable? Because believe me, most leaders want challenges. They want to be held accountable to standards. They're there for a reason. They've earned your trust and confidence. So make sure that if this is something that you need to improve with, we have to lean on them more. You have to lean on your employees, your leaders, to get things done. They're the ones that are going to build your brand, build the confidence and trust in your employees, as long as you have a good strategy behind it. All right. And I really appreciate you all taking the time to listen to this today. Like I said, this is something I genuinely believe in. I put my boss's, Dr. Bob Randall's, contact information on here as well. As you can see, it's something that he offers programs to. He offers diversity programs. He offers, and we offer, I should say, leadership programs along with our engagement platforms. So if you have any questions about who we are, what we offer, or if you have questions about this presentation in general, please contact us at those numbers below. More than willing to help you. And I tell you this, remember, we are all in this together. One of my best leaders that I ever served under always made it a point to say, we have the same problems. When you look over there at that team and look at this team, and you look within yourself, we have the same problems. And the answer to solving these problems is collaboration and engagement. Engaging and investing in your workforce, it will always be worth your money and worth your efforts, because it's going to align with your current and long-ranging strategic visions. So again, I thank you. I wish you nothing but the best in this time. And as we move forward for a more prosperous 2021 and beyond, thank you very much.